financial disclosures to make, and some of the original videos have been borrowed from these publications. I would like to thank and acknowledge my mentor, teacher and guide, Dr. Sampath Srinagar, and other Dr. Balajnath and Dr. Morekar, who I've had the opportunity to observe and learn from, and from whose experience I have taken help to make this presentation. The aim of this IC is to just learn the latest concepts of pediatric oculoplastic with regards to orbital disease. Now, why pediatric oculoplasty we would want to emphasize is that children are not just small adults, and it is very critical that we understand the differences and the nuances which are there in pediatric oculoplasty. Also in this presentation, I will be talking about pediatric orbital trauma, pediatric tumors, and contracted socket. To start off, orbital anatomy. The orbit is a quadrilateral pyramid, and if you go by the equation, it is very obvious that a small change in the base or in the coronal plane causes a great change in the anterior-posterior limb, and hence even a small change in the coronal plane will cause a lot of exophthalmos or enophthalmos. Pediatric orbit anatomy is even more important to understand because it is very dynamic. There is developmental sinuses which is ongoing process. The term eye tooth is to say that the orbit is actually resting along the tooth, and because the maxillary sinus has not developed, this actually prevents flow fractures in children. The medial wall is actually quite thick initially and progressively thins, and the frontal bone and roof fractures are more common. This is because there is a high cranium to face ratio. The bones are not pneumatized, the frontal sinus has not developed, therefore there is no cushion, and also the supraorbital grid is much more prominent. Pediatric facial trauma is a very important topic because not only it leaves the anatomical and the structural changes, but also it has a huge emotional and psychological mark which it leaves on the child. So, pediatric facial fractures cause significant morbidity, and orbital fractures account for nearly 15% of them. So, as you all know, and we take for granted that orbital flow fractures are more common, but as I explained, in children the roof fractures are much more common. Inherently, the child structure is very resistant to producing a fracture because of the higher elasticity of bone and the higher proportion of cancellous bone. However, if there is a fracture in a pediatric age group, we have to understand that there will be more associated comorbidities just for the reason that a higher force would be needed to produce fracture in a child. So we have to rule out neurocranial injuries and other injuries, associated injuries, which are much more common in the pediatric age group. The presenting symptoms are nearly the same, except for the fact that it is seen that the oculocardiac reflex or oculovagal reflex is much more prominent in a child, and also it often leads to a misdiagnosis of a head injury. But this should be kept in mind that it could be just the oculocardiac reflex of a child presenting with nausea and vomiting. You have to rule out head injury, but you also have to keep in mind the oculovagal reflex. There is a recent classification of pediatric orbital fractures, which is put into perspective, taking into perspective the clinical relevance as opposed to just the pure blow and blow fractures which are commonly used. The initial management is very standard, ice the affected area, and ordinary standard protocols which a pediatric ophthalmologist as well as the oculoplastic surgeon or any general ophthalmologist must do in any patient. The Peterson's principles of managing orbital fractures classify them into, first you have to see if there is a functional deficit or a cosmetic deficit. Now, the moment there is a functional deficit, you really jump on to doing a surgery. No. because there are certain causes, where there are certain cases where, although there is a functional deficit, it may either resolve with time, such as emesis, severe edema, or even a hematoma, which you can just wait and watch. Otherwise, a surgical mode is needed. When there is a cosmetic deficit only, for most of it you can wait and watch, and then later if required, the treatment will be available. This is a patient with orbital hematoma. Just to emphasize that even though this patient had functional deficit, just doing nothing, just waiting and watching really helped this patient, and he recovered really completely. The role of MRI in differentiating herniating tissues. Now, the greenstick fracture in pediatric population is extremely common. The bones just snap back, and there could be a very small, just like a muscle sheet or connective tissue which may be interact, which might not be evident on CT, which we normally promote for trauma. But MRI can be useful in these patients to differentiate if there is a herniating tissue. There are absolute indications for surgical repair and repair, which are more or less same as for adults. But what is important is the timing of surgery. What is different from adults to pediatrics? 7 to 10 days after trauma is a common victim. But if the fracture area is much more than the volume of intract tissue, as in there's too much volume, or even though there's a very small fracture, and early surgery is indicated, and we would prefer to do an endoscopic route. Pediatric facial bones heal faster, children heal faster, and intervention must be sooner in these cases. A review article in JAPOS showed that the majority of patients who presented early and underwent prompt surgery actually had a faster recovery and better post-op motility. So for young patients with symptomatic diplopia, positive post-action test, soft tissue fractures, surgery should be within 2 to 5 days. This is much earlier than what we promote for adults. It is also recommended that there is no other problem, we can even consider surgery as soon as 48 hours. However, even 48 hours is too long for a patient like this who is running into compartment syndrome or edema leading to a compartment syndrome where the vision is at risk. So there are certain guidelines. Even although despite me repeatedly saying that go in early, we should first rule out any other comorbidities which a child is likely to have before jumping into any surgery. CT for intraoperative foreign body is a good thing to know because oftentimes we do not know what caused the fracture. Many times the child is just found after trauma, and we have to rule out any type of foreign body. Now, classification of surgery could either be with or without implant, and the approach, although we promote endoscopic, sometimes the endoscopic approach is too difficult, and we may need to do an open approach. These are various ways to fix an orbital fracture. Either just go subsidiary incision and go ahead and put an implant, or use the titanium plates or screws. The endoscopy is a newer modality and lesser traumatic to the patient. Sometimes we need to combine both the endoscopy and the open approach for the maximum benefit. Now, roof fractures I will just rush through because for most of it, they are managed conservatively. Orbital fracture, apart from that, in trauma, you also have the skin lacerations, which are now more being treated with tissue adhesives and staples, which have been proven to be compatible to the normal suture technique and faster and sometimes even better results. The other main focus area is tumors, orbital tumors. What is new is nothing. There are no new tumors which are coming, but what is new is the awareness which is coming now. The pediatric ophthalmologists and general ophthalmologists are being more and more aware of the problem. Like for example, this patient a 5-month-old child was treated just for keratoconjunctivitis, allergic conjunctivitis, because she kept rubbing her eyes. Just because the ophthalmologist actually did not pick up that she was rubbing her eyes because she was not able to see because of the bilateral retinoblastoma. So the awareness is what is really needed and called for the day. The type of tumors which occur in children is also little different from that in adults, and the ophthalmologist should keep this in mind. You have to have a very high index of suspicion because the presenting symptoms can be very varied, and infection can masquerade. A tumor can masquerade as an infection, or a simple surface problem can masquerade as something more severe, just because the symptoms produced are both. Like for example, this small 3-month-old child came with a mask which was not disturbing the patient or the parents at all, but just for a general checkup, the mother was curious to know, and she came and showed us this child, and he actually did an incision biopsy and was found to have extrarenal rhabdoid tumor, a life-threatening disease. Even tumors which are not so common, such as OSSN, can occur in patients with xeroderma pigmentosa, even in the pediatric age group. There are new modalities of imaging the orbital vascular lesions, and it is becoming more and more less invasive. Dermoid, there can be benign tumors such as the dermoid, and these are less light-threatening but can be more sight-threatening. So we should keep in mind that apart just from treating the cause, is it having any other side effects, and those need to be treated also, and the time of the surgery has to be taken care of. Surgeries of lid neurofibroma, again, very potential for antiopia. This patient with a lid neurofibroma had an absent sphenoid limb, and the surgery done in such a case should be extremely meticulous, and bearing in mind that there will be no bony obstruction between the orbit and the brain. So there are more further advances in therapy of each and every individual tumor, which I will not go into detail with. And the approaches to the orbit will be covered by Dr. Morekar in his subsequent lectures. But I would just like to share with you some of the patients who have come with us and how they have been benefited with timely intervention. Like for example, this child with lymphangioma, benign tumor but potentially sight-threatening in this case, with a small with a normal intervention was restored vision. Sometimes a more aggressive combined orbital neural approach is required. Sometimes you can get away with just endoscopic removal of tumors, giving a the slightest of marks on them. Contractile socket is another very important topic when it comes to pediatrics, and there are various ways of treating it. And there have been many new advances. For the lack of time, I will just rush through the slides. An expandable balloon implant is one of the newer advances which has extremely helped a lot of patients with contractile sockets. So in summary, I would just like to say that we have to treat children as children and not just as small adults, and do the same what we are doing for adults